And welcome back. We're ready for our next guest.
Yeah, our next guest is Matthijs Kamstra. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He looks much tamer right now than he does on his Twitter handle picture. I was like, oh my God, it's some sort of Viking. It's an invasion. Anyway, yeah, he is not new in the Hex community. I think you've been around, I've seen you around for a while, but I think this is your first time appearing at a Hex event, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty
Um,
exciting.
yeah, but Hex events were kind of intimidating, so I was a little bit pushed off by the idea of going to France or America to visit an event. But, well, this is one I can do from my own home, so comfortable enough.
That's cool. So I'm glad that this actually worked. I was looking forward to having some new people. So here are new people. So anyway, I'll just let you go ahead. Yeah.
You have a video for us, right?
Yeah, I wanted to have a video because sometimes I start to stutter and get lost in the words, so I think it might be a good idea to pre-record it. So that's what I did. Yeah,
All
All
right.
right.
And then after that, we'll tune back with you for some questions.
yeah. I'm ready to answer some questions if there are any.
All right. Then see
Yeah.
you in a bit.
Okay. So the video starts at once. So once I press play, we're gone.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Welcome. At my talk, I'm going to talk a bit about creative coding with Hex. My name is Matthijs, Kamstra. I have a couple of chapters that we will be talking about. So there's chapter 1, we'll be talking about me. Then we'll talk about creative coding and a bit about Hex. And then we have time for Q&A. So, starting with chapter 1. Who is Matthijs Kamstra? I have a day job and I introduce myself as the lead.
You are muted.
So, these are two different persons normally in my world. You have a designer and a developer. So, let's see if I can convince you a bit of what I am. The designer part of me. This is the first paper toy I ever made. It's called Grum. And it made me, I had a lot of fun with him. We had a lot of fun. We went to museum, expositions, and we did workshops and talks about paper toys. Lots of fun. It also introduced me as a person who can do illustrations. And this one is the creation of a skateboard, which would be auctioned off. And I was in competition with 20 other illustrators, so I was quite happy with the result. I'm one of the 10 hottest paper toy designers from around the world. It's just to quote in one of these books. And these are the 4 books that I am in. You can still buy them, or at least 3 of them. You can buy them on Amazon. They're just fun for children, but it's also fun for adults. Went with a group, the Urban Paper Collective, and we did workshops, and we had an exhibition for a couple of years in Ansberg in Germany. I also create books, and this book is about, it's in Dutch, and it's about the graphic language of self-help. So I'm also a developer, so let's dive into that part of my life. This is what I did when I was working for an advertising company. Did a lot of fun stuff for festivals and beer. Good combination, by the way. Also created an app called Kleine Stapjes. It's for people who have a child with Down syndrome, and it helps them with their development. We created a website for the Plastic Soup Foundation, which educates children about plastic and what it's doing to our oceans. And I also created an app for the police. It's a virtual reality app made in Unity to talk about racial profiling. So it's a safe environment. You watch it in VR, you make decisions, and after that you can discuss that with your instructor. So that's the designer part and the development part. We can discuss if they're separate, some parts that are joined together in this Venn diagram. In my world, you call that person a unicorn. Yes, I am a unicorn. I might be surprised about it. But historically speaking, I shouldn't be surprised. My name is Kamstra. This is the family crest of the Kamstras. And you see unicorns. So I'm also historically a unicorn. Yes. So let's talk about hacks and me. Yes, how I stopped using hacks. Well, you already know this is a love story, so this is the sad part of the story. When I finished art school, I was a graphic designer. I started working as a new media designer. So we had the old media, which was print, and new media was websites, CD-ROMs, etc., etc. I found out that I was a great storyteller, visual storyteller. So I started using animations in Flash. It's also why I started programming. I wanted to make more complex animation, more dynamic animations that if you looked at more often, you would see the subtleties of change. So I started programming in ActionScript and ActionScript 2. And it was primarily first done in the Flash editor itself. And people who remember that will probably know that it was not a very friendly environment to program in. So I started looking for a replacement, and I found it in SAPI ActionScript editor, which was geared, I think, towards ActionScript 2. And that's how I got introduced to MTask. Good to know is that at this moment I was in a company that had great developers, but no one was interested in ActionScript specifically. I had to do this on my own, which was quite difficult if you don't have any formal training. We started moving from ActionScript 2 to ActionScript 3, and MTask didn't do that. It started with hacks, and I was looking into it, and I thought it was too difficult, and I stopped using it, and I switched to a different editor, FTT. But yeah, of course, it's a love story. I did not stop using hacks. I started using hacks again, and it happened because someone was talking about a game engine called AW6. That got my interest started again. I must have been further in my development as a developer. I remember that I liked Neko because that the power to write stuff to the disk. But also I worked at a company which used a lot of PHP at the back end. So I thought it was a good idea to experiment with that as well. OpenMFL was fun because it was close to Flash and I was working with mobile a lot. So that was a good idea. And later I started focusing on JavaScript and Node.js. And that brings me to Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is about creative coding. So if you don't know what creative coding is, it is a type of computer programming in which the goal is to create something expressive instead of something functional. Creative coding, there's a lot of libraries out there, and this list is very long. So I just picked a few that you might or might not know. So processing, which is written in Java. There's Open Frameworks, which is written in C++. We have Unity, which is written in C#, which you write in C#. P5.js, which is a JavaScript version of processing. And I also found something similar for Python. Flash, of course, may it rest in peace. It was a great tool to do creative coding. So, how did I start that creative coding with hacks? I read an article from George Kelly that was about creative coding, and he told in that article how he loved Flash and he wanted to recreate that in JavaScript, why he didn't use a standard JavaScript because he wanted to learn more about JavaScript itself. So it sounded like a good thing, and it sparked a lot of interest in me. I started to do a 30-day challenge. And a 30-day challenge is make a small change you can incorporate into your life each day for the next 30 days, which I did. And of course, I wanted to have some goals, so make it simple. I wanted to start with creative coding, create a habit out of it, work 30 days and have 30 images. So every day, at the end of the day, I should have a visual or an animation that I could show the world. And I used Instagram for that to as my portfolio. It was an easy platform to upload stuff and didn't want to spend any time on picking a CMS. And of course, at the end, I want to have my own creative coding library. Might be inspired by others, but it is my own. And the sketches could be experimental. I'm not going to lie. Not everything was great, especially in the beginning. And I wanted to focus after 30 days. I wanted to dial down the export, so not every day a sketch, but I wanted to focus also on sound and video and APIs. And last but not least, I wanted to have a talk about my experiences. I ended up with almost 60 days working on creative coding, visuals, and animations. And this is the first ever animation I made. So I was working a couple of days, and in those days it was more the basic shapes like squares and circles and line. But at day 4 or 5, I got this one. It was something I always wanted to do. And I also created a animation library. I had already an animation library, but not working with JavaScript yet, so fix that. But also just really fun visual stuff to look at. I have a lot of these, and I started using them in other projects as well. And you might have noticed that they were primarily black and white. After a while, I started experimenting with colors. I found a color class in which I easily could just switch colors. And I started using that in my sketches. Is it difficult to do in Canvas? No, not exactly. I will show you a vanilla JS version of this. So I wanted to have a full screen or inner width, inner height window canvas size. So this is the first part of this code. Then we have 3 colors. You can do any color you know from HTML and CSS. This is the canvas. You create the canvas, set the width and the height, and append it to the body, and then get the context. Now, well, we wanted to create this background color and this circle with this outline. So you have to start with the drawing, get the fill style, the fill color, create the rectangle for the background color, which starts in the upper left and ends with the bottom right, and then set the fill. And then you have to do the same thing for the circle. You set the fill stroke, the stroke style, the 2 colors, the line width, then create the circle, the fill and stroke, and close it up again. Well, I created in Sketch, of course. I'm cheating a lot here, but I could do it in a shorter amount of lines. 3 colors. I didn't want to use strings, so I made a util for that. Create the sketch, which is automatically full screen. Change the background color. Then do the fill, stroke, and weight, and then create the fill, circle fill stroke, and then you're done. So I also mentioned that I use Instagram as my portfolio. After 60 plus days of working on that, I started getting the bug. The bug that makes you want to have more likes or more followers. And I sort of get obsessed about getting more followers. So I started scraping data from Instagram, using that to create animation that I normally would make in Flash. It was fun to do. And I also could scrape the data of the people who were liking my work, so I scraped that as well. after people liked it and they were part of this animation, fun stuff to do, which I normally would do in Flash. And so a clothing company asked me if I wanted to do a all-over print, which was a great idea. So I started, they had some examples, I started building that in my library, and it seemed like a good idea. And of course I wanted to promote that on Instagram as well. So these are 3 images that you could scroll through, and a lot of animation, a lot of patterns that would work on a jacket. So it's good to know that at this point, everything I did was in Canvas. And if you know Canvas, you know that you can't export to PNG and JPEG, but not other formats. I didn't have a lot of shapes, I just had the basic ones, like circles, rectangles, etc. And I had an animation and a grid util, which made it possible to make all these patterns. But I also made some other promises. So I would say I create seamless patterns, which was possible in code, of course. Non-repeating patterns, unique. Enormous size patterns. Well, there's a limit to the canvas, but technically possible if I wanted to. But this one was the biggest one. I wanted to use it in Illustrator as well. And you can use, of course, PNG and JPEG in Illustrator, but I don't think they meant this. So at this point, I started talking about money. And they said, we're not going to pay you for this. This is just for you. But at this moment, I was already triggered. And I was primarily triggered because I also wanted to use it in Illustrator. I use that for my design work, for patterns that I create, all done in Illustrator. So I wanted to start working on the next version of Sketch. And I wanted to use Canvas or AVG. So at this moment, I'm creating a lot of SVG patterns made with the code I already had, and that worked fine for me. So I also wanted to create something in the real world. So I made a calendar which had 12 months of creative coding visuals, but also the layout was generated by my library. The only thing that I designed by hand was the cover. And I also started working on other stuff as well. So the official Office doodle book, paper toy doodle book. The patterns of the paper toys are generated by code. Not everything is generated by code. And my daughter made a good example how you should use that. The paying gig of the clothing company didn't go through, but I wanted to get in touch with other people who do similar stuff. And I thought, well, let's see if data visualization is something that I could do. So I bluffed my way into a speaking position for a meetup. This is pre-COVID, of course. And I showed them parts of my work. And I said, well, the animation reacts to music. And I made, of course, an example for that. Yes. Of course, I wanted to prepare for this meetup, and this way, my the Canvas part of this library got some attention again. Sadly enough, COVID killed all those meetups. Yeah, there's not a lot I could do. It also meant that my focus was changing. It was more on data visualization. This is one I already that Washington Post did, and I recreated it. It was more about how free for all would affect us all and how fast that would go. I made also one about social distancing, which shows more that if you don't move around a lot, it's much more difficult to get everybody sick in a very fast way. And just some animations that's fun to make. I try to do something positive about COVID and my creative coding. So then COVID hit us all. It slowed me a bit down. I started making visualizations about that the Washington Post also already made, and it's just fun to make, and it showed really good what would happen if you did the free for all, and how many people will die and how many people will cured, but also about social distancing. What would happen if not everybody started moving around, and it's much difficult to get everybody infected that way. And these fun animations that just are fun to make and nice experiment in typography animation. But again, it slowed me down. I started refreshing browsers too much, so I started thinking I need to do something physical, stop living in a browser. And I so created these masks, and these masks, the patterns are of course made with my library. Just fun to make and fun to generate. And then altogether it stopped. My habit stopped. I couldn't create any cool code stuff anymore. Till I bought myself a cheap controller and started working with the controller and the animations again. These are, of course, shapes, or these are shapes controlled by the game controller and colors from the color patterns, etc., etc. And it's just fun to have, and I thought it would be a good transitional tool between game developers and creative coders. That brings us to part 3 of my talk. And I want to stress out, these are the improvements I made to help myself or my future selves a bit. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that I love hacks. It's not bashing. I love hacks, so there is no reason to do that. These are the things that I ran into when I started using hacks and using different targets. So why do I use Hex now? I think it's convenient for me. ActionScript 3 was awesome. I still love it. Hex is just a very convenient tool for me. It's also close in my comfort zone. I use it for where I make my money. I use it for JavaScript. Also, the focus on art is making it and not thinking about the language that I want to use. And that makes Hex makes that possible. I can just switch to Python on a Raspberry Pi easily if I want to have something done there. And yeah, I don't have to use Python. JavaScript is almost everywhere, so I just use JavaScript instead. And yeah, it's strongly typed. I like that a lot. And I remember that when I was transitioning from AS2 to AS3, I hated it, but now I love it. I try to be proactive about helping, and I'm doing that by creating documentation for Hex and JavaScript. I did some pull requests, I think, for JSKit, but I also wrote some documentation about PHP and Hex, and Node, the system languages, Python and Unity. When I create something that is made with Hex, I mention that in the socials, on Twitter or on Instagram. I try to talk to professionals about Hex all the time, which I'm not particularly successful at, but I do. And I created this talk, which might be as a different sound in the Hex events. There's also a lot of good stuff, so I want to mention that as well. I think that the best thing happened to Hex, besides Hex, is Visual Studio Code. I love the fact that it is only a one-click install. Just download it and it's installed. I think it's really stable. I don't run into weird things, so it's really stable. And JavaScript is awesome. And also I like the events. The events are more recent years, but I think they're important and we could do that more often. Games. We know that Hex is good at games. Yeah, the improvements during my years. It sounds a little bit dramatic, but yeah. The website is improved a lot since the first one. The manual is much more documented. I love the code cookbook. It has examples of difficult to understand parts of Hex documentation. And of course, for businesses, the Hex Foundation is an improvement, and the way we can connect to each other with forums and etc. That's all just really awesome. So, yeah, with love. The improvements from my perspective. Well, we already know my story a bit. It's not the usual, I think. First thing that you run into when you start learning about Hex is the documentation, which is the first place you will look at for information, and it's kind of intimidating because it's not for beginners. So yes, I think that you are probably not a junior when you start working with Hex. You're probably a junior, medium, or senior, probably a senior, and you have probably some experience with other languages as well. I noticed that when I was working on the PHP target, I was thinking, oh, I know Hex, so I can do that PHP part very easily. That's not entirely the case. It's not that easy. You have to dive into PHP as well. There's a lot of game developers, obviously. A lot of former ActionScript 3 developers, which of course is something that will disappear eventually. And some curious. You have to be curious if you want to do Hex. Okay, so this is a completely non-scientific and maybe completely out of context, but it feels a bit that it is always on top. So if you want to learn JavaScript via Hex, it's more difficult because you have to understand Hex, you have to understand JavaScript, and you have to understand how they communicate with each other. The same thing with the other languages. So it's just difficult. I also have problem explaining to other people what problem does it fix. So we know that TypeScript extends JavaScript by adding types. But what does Hex fix? I can't find it on the website, and it's quite difficult to explain why you want to use Hex. So I also want to talk about the documentation, how to get started. I know it's there. I have seen it in the past, but I couldn't find it on the website again. This is also part why I started documenting PHP and JavaScript. And yeah, this is what but the first started thinking about how I could help Hex. I started working on a documentation and adding examples to it. And the reason why is that I used that in the past with ActionScript 3, which was very easy. You have a new concept you want to try out, you just copy paste, and it works. I thought it would be great if Hex has some similar feature. I also think that every target should have his own documentation. Let's see, we have 2 targets or 3 targets that are from the beginning. We have JavaScript, Flash, and PHP. And PHP target has 2 pages that explains how to use PHP. You're using JavaScript, you have 6 pages, which I think. So I'm very happy that my documentation is mentioned there as well. When you start in something new, you probably buy a book or do a course or whatever. With Hex, that's a very, very bad idea. If you start reading books about that, you're reading from the past. And of course, an online course would be great. I think that Andy all started it, but it never took off. I think it was a great idea, and I'd love to have lessons from Andy Lee. Okay. I'm not sure this will improve anything for Hex. No, I'm pretty sure it will not. But I would love to have not a shirt, but a mug. Okay, and this is probably cursing in church, but this is something that I do a lot. I have an idea, I want to check how it will work. I just Google a bit JavaScript and I do a copy-paste. That is not that easy in Hex. And I'm not 100% sure about the first statement I make here. JavaScript is TypeScript, so copy-paste will work. Probably you have to change some types. But I'm pretty sure that CSS and SCSS work fine. but JavaScript and Hex isn't. So I also did a chapter about that in the documentation, which makes it easier to do the copy-paste stuff. When working on the document on this talk, was thinking maybe there is a solution in macros as well, but I'm not that good at macros yet.
That's all, folks.
Yes, so that's the finish of my talk, and with that, I also have checked off my last goals of the creative coding. I've done a talk about my experience. Thank you for that. So we have time for Q&A now. Part 4 in my talk, the Q&A.
Thank you very much. That was very entertaining.
Just let
Yeah.
me switch the audio. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you make him big again?
What?
Will you increase that maybe? Like just. Yes. Hi.
Hi.
That's so cool. Everything
you.
looks so nice. You can tell I'm not a programmer either because I'm like completely enchanted by this talk. Everything looks so wonderful.
Well, I am a programmer and I still enjoyed it. And I was thinking like, man, all these animations, it would be really nice to have these on our stream, like in the pause screen or something. So something would be moving. That would be really interesting. And yeah, this is actually really cool because it's so different from what we normally have. So thank you very much for this talk.
Yeah, thank
You're
you
welcome.
for stepping up. Now, do we have any questions? We have someone is agreeing with you on target-specific documentation.
Yes.
So you have supporters and followers. Here's your dopamine rush. There you go. Do you have any questions?
You wanted to pick up on making on social media. And
Oh, yes. Yeah, but that was, I wanted to talk about that later anyway, but
okay,
that's
I
okay.
just wanted to.
But I think
say
it's
that
really
it's really
cool
good.
that you actually point that out in your talk, specifically that you talk about, because I share this experience of how do you explain hacks to other people, right?
Yeah.
Because that's been something that from a marketing hacks perspective has been a really big question for a very, very long time because it can potentially be anything to anyone and it's really hard to narrow that down. So just the example that I usually end up with a games related example here where most people kind of understand server side and client side logic in games where they know, okay, so you have whatever runs on the server and you have whatever you see. And usually you have to do that twice. It's like painting two houses in a sense. And this way you kind of get to paint the thing once and then project it onto different things, right? So that's how I explain it. It's kind of just the code sharing example works really well from the games industry. It's usually what not so technical people can relate to is games. They understand that.
Yeah.
Beyond that,
I-
it gets very technical.
Yeah, I have a problem is that I'm not a game developer. So
Yeah.
if I want to explain anything, the game stuff is just not a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Web development. So
And I think that's something that is really important in the community to share more of like, how do we explain hacks, right? Like to help each other out with examples and with, so here is how I explain it. How do you explain it, right? So that is something that we could stand to have more of a conversation on, I think. And I have another question here from Randy. He asks, what was the top new idea or ideas you got while you were on your quest, on your 30-day quest? Was there any epiphany?
Well, I started from scratch. So the idea was that I built my own library based on information from others, but also my own stuff that I wanted to do. So the quest was build one that works with Canvas. And later on, I started experimenting with SVG as well. So now I have a switch. I can build it in Canvas for animation mostly, and SVG for generation. So that was the big switch. What I built in my during my quest, and the new ideas were primarily based on doing data analysis and visualization, data visualization, and now I'm geared towards using game controllers as input for creating creative coding examples.
Yeah.
So that's what I ended up now.
So you're basically actually like primarily an artist, right? Sort of.
Yeah.
Right? You're an artist and you use Hex. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had like one other guy way back in the day. His name is Dan Head. He is based in the UK, and he did a couple of art projects with Hex as well. I don't know that he still uses it, but it's definitely there. It's just so rare to meet a unicorn, right? So, yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great to hear from you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Yeah, I do.
Perhaps.
I do.
One day we will.
Yeah.
All right then.
Okay.
Thank you and see you. Okay, we're going to take a bit of a longer break now. Right?
Yeah, we're basically taking our reset break, which I deliberately put into the schedule to wait for our American speakers to wake up.
Yeah, they have to wake up.
So,
Will be about 40 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be here back at 5:30 European time.
Right. So,
all right.
Get some coffee, relax a bit, get some fresh air, and we'll see you then.